The cruelest thing about betrayal is that it usually arrives wearing a smile. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, every surface reflecting gold light and carefully crafted success. Guests in designer suits and evening gowns moved between white marble columns, raising champagne glasses to celebrate Ryan Balker's engagement. Laughter drifted through the room. Cameras flashed. A string quartet played softly from the elevated stage. At the center of it all stood Ryan, confident, polished, admired. Beside him was his fiancée, Ashley Monroe, her hand resting lightly on his arm as photographers called their names. Together they looked like the future everyone expected. Then the doors opened. Vanessa Brooks stepped inside. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but understated, the kind of dress that never asked for attention. For a brief moment, several guests turned to look. Some recognized her immediately. Others whispered quietly, trying to remember where they had seen her before. Ryan noticed her too. His eyes met hers across the room. Used for a second. Then he looked away as if she were a stranger. Vanessa felt the shift instantly. Not because of what he said. Because of what he didn't. 5 years of marriage reduced to a glance that lasted less than a heartbeat. Around here, conversations resumed. Smiles returned. The party continued moving forward as though she had never been part of the story. She walked calmly toward the reception desk where final legal documents waited for her signature. The divorce paperwork had already been completed weeks ago. Tonight was simply the last administrative detail. Ryan never approached. He never asked how she was. He never introduced her to anyone standing beside him. Instead, he lifted his glass and began a speech. Life has a way of bringing the right people together at the right time, he said, drawing applause from the crowd. More laughter followed. Vanessa lowered her eyes toward the documents in front of her and signed her name with steady hands. No anger. No sin. No argument. The ink dried within seconds. Across the room, applause erupted as Ryan kissed Ashley's hand for the cameras. Vanessa folded the papers neatly and prepared to leave. That was when her phone vibrated. One message. One unknown sender. She almost ignored it. Then she opened it. Her steps slowed. The screen displayed only a few words. A private courier will deliver an inheritance notice tomorrow morning. Please be available. Vanessa stared at the message while the celebration continued behind her. Somewhere beneath the music, beneath the laughter, beneath the illusion that everything had already been decided, the first crack had quietly appeared. The city looked different after midnight. Manhattan still glowed beyond the windows of Vanessa Brooks's apartment, but the noise felt farther away now, softened by distance and glass. She stood near the window with her phone still in her hand, reading the message again. A private courier will deliver an inheritance notice tomorrow morning. Please be available. No company name. No explanation. No signature. Used a message that seemed completely disconnected from the life she had been living. Vanessa placed the phone on the kitchen counter and slowly removed her earrings. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic 20 floors below. On another night she might have spent hours replaying the scene from the engagement party. Ryan's speech. The applause. The way he had looked through her instead of at her. But tonight felt different. Not because the pain was gone. Because something else had interrupted it. Her eyes drifted toward an old photograph sitting on a bookshelf across the room. It had been taken nearly 7 years earlier. Before the success. Before the magazine covers. Before investors started inviting Ryan to private events and business conferences. In the photograph they were standing inside a tiny office no larger than 400 square feet. The paint on the walls was uneven. The furniture came from thrift stores. Ryan was smiling at the camera while holding a stack of business plans. Vanessa stood beside him with a laptop tucked under one arm. Back then, they had built everything together. When Ryan stayed awake until 3 in the morning preparing presentations, Vanessa stayed awake too. When clients cancelled meetings, she found replacements. When payroll deadlines arrived and money was tight, she quietly picked up extra consulting work to help cover expenses. There had been no photographers. No champagne. No luxury hotels. Used long hours and belief. She remembered winter mornings carrying coffee through icy streets before sunrise. She remembered reviewing contracts while eating takeout from paper containers. She remembered believing that sacrifice was temporary because they were building a future together. Somewhere along the way, success changed the story. Or maybe it simply revealed it. By the time Ryan's company began appearing in financial magazines, her role had already started disappearing from conversations. Then from meetings. Then from introductions. Eventually, from his life. Vanessa looked away from the photograph and opened a kitchen cabinet. A familiar ache lingered beneath the surface of those memories, but it no longer controlled her. The hardest part of losing someone was not watching them leave. It was realizing they had been leaving long before you noticed. The next morning arrived with gray skies and a steady spring rain tapping against the windows. At exactly 9 o'clock, the building concierge called. A courier was waiting downstairs. Vanessa grabbed her coat and took the elevator to the lobby. The man waiting near the entrance wore a dark suit and carried a black leather envelope. It confirmed her identity without smiling. Then he handed over the package. The paper felt heavier than it should have. On the front was a gold seal and a name she had never expected to see. Arthur Kensington. One of the most influential billionaires in America. Vanessa stared at the envelope while rain streaked across the glass doors behind her. And for the second time in less than 12 hours, she found herself holding something that made absolutely no sense. So many names are so powerful that seeing them on paper feels unreal. Vanessa remained standing in the lobby long after the courier had left. Around here, people hurried through revolving doors carrying umbrellas and coffee cups, moving through another ordinary Manhattan morning. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. Arthur Kensington. The name remained stamped across the envelope in elegant gold lettering. She knew exactly who he was. Everyone did. For more than 3 decades, Arthur Kensington had built one of the largest business empires in the country. Financial networks discussed his investments daily. Universities studied his leadership. Entire neighborhoods carried his name on hospitals, foundations, and public projects. Yet Vanessa had never met him. At least, that was what she believed. Back upstairs, she placed the envelope carefully on her dining table. For several moments she simply stared at it. Then she finally broke the seal. Inside was a single letter and an invitation. The letter was brief. A private legal meeting had been scheduled for Friday morning at Kensington Legal Associates. Her presence was required. Additional information would be disclosed in person. That was all. No explanation. No details. No mention of inheritance. Vanessa read the page twice, then a third time. The questions only multiplied. Why would one of the most influential families in America want to meet with her? By noon she was still trying to make sense of it when her phone vibrated again. This time it was her friend Monica. They had worked together years earlier before life pulled them onto different paths. Monica's voice came through the speaker immediately. Excited. Curious. Concerned. Vanessa told her about the letter. A long silence followed. Then Monica laughed softly. Either somebody made a huge mistake, or your life is about to get very interesting. Vanessa smiled for the first time all morning. After ending the call, she opened her laptop and searched recent news involving the Kensington family. What she found surprised her. Arthur Kensington had passed away 3 weeks earlier at the age of 81. News outlets reported that lawyers were still organizing the details of his estate. Financial analysts speculated constantly about potential heirs. Some believed control would go to board members. Others expected distant relatives. Nobody seemed certain. Vanessa closed the laptop slowly. The timing suddenly felt impossible to ignore. Across the city, Ryan Walker was having a very different day. His engagement party dominated social media. Photos of him and Ashley appeared everywhere. Interviews were already being scheduled. Investors congratulated him. Business contacts praised his future plans. Everything seemed to be moving exactly as he wanted. Yet even as his public life accelerated, another story was quietly beginning to unfold beyond his view. That evening Vanessa stood by her apartment window watching rain slide down the glass. The invitation remained on the table behind her. She tried to convince herself that there had been some clerical error. Some confusion. Some misunderstanding that would be corrected by Friday morning. But deep down, something felt different. Not exciting. Not frightening. Just different. Then her phone buzzed once more. Another message from the same private number. We recommend that you arrive 30 minutes early. Several matters concerning Arthur Kensington's final wishes are time-sensitive. Vanessa read the message carefully. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened window. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled above the city skyline. And for reasons she could not explain, she suddenly had the feeling that someone had been expecting her for a very long time. Frida arrived beneath clear skies and unusually warm spring sunlight. By 8:30 in the morning, Vanessa was already standing across the street from Kensington Legal Associates, staring at the glass tower that rose above the surrounding buildings. The structure reflected the city skyline like a mirror, polished and imposing. She checked the invitation one final time before crossing the street. Inside, the lobby felt more like a private financial institution than a law office. Marble floors stretched beneath soft lighting. Security personnel greeted visitors by name. Everything operated with quiet precision. Vanessa approached the reception desk and introduced herself. The receptionist's expression changed immediately. Not with surprise. With recognition. As though her arrival had been anticipated for weeks. Ms. Brooks, they are expecting you, the woman said politely. A private elevator. Opened moments later. On the 37th floor, a conference room overlooked the Hudson River. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the room with natural light. A long walnut table occupied the center. Several attorneys were already seated. None of them appeared rushed. None appeared confused about why she was there. The senior attorney, a silver-haired man named Charles Bennett, stood and welcomed her warmly. Thank you for coming, Ms. Brooks. Vanessa took a seat, placing the invitation carefully beside her. Her pulse remained steady, but the questions that had followed her all week felt louder than ever. Charles folded his hands. Before we begin, there is something important you should understand. Arthur Kensington personally instructed our firm to contact you immediately following the conclusion of probate review. Vanessa frowned slightly. There must be some mistake. He never knew Mr. Kensington. Several attorneys exchanged brief glances. Charles offered a small smile. That is what makes this conversation so remarkable. He opened a thick file resting in front of him. Inside were photographs, letters, and documents organized with extraordinary care. Then he slid one photograph across the table. Vanessa looked down. The image stopped her cold. It showed a charity fundraising event from nearly 8 years earlier. She recognized herself instantly. At the time she had volunteered at a community outreach program on weekends while helping Ryan build his business during the week. The photograph captured her speaking with an elderly gentleman seated alone near a garden courtyard. Vanessa barely remembered the conversation. Yet she remembered the man. Keen eyes. Quiet voice. Expensive watch. She had spent almost an hour talking with him while everyone else focused on donors and executives. Slowly, Vanessa lifted her gaze. That was Arthur Kensington? Charles nodded. Yes. Silence settled across the room. Vanessa stared at the photograph again. The memory began returning in fragments. Arthur had asked questions that day. Not about money. Not about status. He had asked about purpose. Family. Responsibility. Integrity. At the time she assumed he was simply another retired guest attending the fundraiser. Charles carefully opened another folder. That conversation was only the beginning. Mary Kensington continued following your work for years through charitable organizations, business records, and private reports. Vanessa blinked. Following my work. Very closely. The attorney's voice remained calm. In fact, M.A.S. Brooks, your name appears hundreds of times throughout his private notes. The room suddenly felt very still. Outside the windows, ferries moved slowly across the river. Traffic flowed through Manhattan exactly as it always had. Yet inside that conference room, Vanessa had just learned something impossible. Somewhere, for nearly a decade, one of the most powerful men in America had been paying attention to her life. And she had never known it. Vanessa sat motionless as Charles Bennett opened another section of the file. The photographs were only the beginning. One by one, documents appeared across the polished table. Newspaper clippings. Event records. Annual reports from charitable organizations. Volunteer acknowledgements. Scholarship programs. Community projects. At first glance, the papers seemed unrelated. Then a pattern emerged. Every document included her name. Sometimes prominently. Sometimes buried within pages of details. Yet somehow Arthur Kensington had noticed every one of them. Charles adjusted his glasses and carefully lifted a handwritten notebook from the file. The cover showed signs of age and frequent use. This belonged to Mary Kensington, he said quietly. He kept personal observations on individuals he considered exceptional. Vanessa felt her stomach tighten slightly. Charles opened the notebook to a bookmarked page. The handwriting was elegant and deliberate. He began reading aloud. Most people become generous after success. Vanessa Brooks remained generous before success. That distinction matters. Silence filled the room. Charles turned another page. Character revealed during struggle is more valuable than character displayed during comfort. Vanessa lowered her eyes. Hearing those words felt strangely personal. As though someone had been watching moments she barely remembered herself. The attorney continued. In 8 years of observation, I have never found evidence that she sacrifices principle for advantage. Charles finally closed the notebook. There are dozens of entries like these. Vanessa looked toward the windows. The river beyond seemed distant now. None of this felt real. Why? She asked softly. Why would he spend years paying attention to someone like me? Charles leaned back slightly. Because Mary Kensington spent the last decade searching for something he believed had become rare. Vanessa waited. Integrity, he replied. The answer lingered in the room. Arthur Kensington had spent most of his life surrounded by powerful executives, influential politicians, financial advisors, and wealthy families. Yet according to the documents before her, the quality he valued most could not be purchased. Over the following hour, more pieces of the story emerged. Arthur had quietly funded several non-profit organizations where Vanessa volunteered. He had received reports from directors who repeatedly described her willingness to help without seeking recognition. He knew she had mentored young entrepreneurs. He knew she had contributed time to literacy programs. He knew she had continued supporting community projects even while struggling through the collapse of her marriage. None of it had been dramatic enough to make headlines. Yet somehow it mattered. Across Manhattan, Ryan Walker sat inside a conference room overlooking Central Park. His company was preparing for a major expansion announcement. Investors reviewed presentations while advisors discussed growth projections. Ryan looked confident. Relaxed. Completely unaware that only a few miles away, his former wife was learning that one of the most respected billionaires in America had spent years studying her character. Back inside Kensington Legal Associates, Charles slid a final document across the table. Unlike everything else, this one remained sealed. The envelope was cream-colored and marked with Arthur Kensington's personal signature. Mr. Kensington left specific instructions regarding this letter, Charles said. It may only be opened in your presence. Vanessa stared at the signature. The room suddenly felt quieter than before. She carefully reached forward and placed her fingertips against the envelope. Whatever answers she had found today, she sensed they were only the surface. Because for the first time since this strange journey began, she realized something important. Arthur Kensington had not chosen her by accident. And whatever was written inside that letter was about to explain why. Vanessa carefully opened the envelope. The paper inside was thick and cream-colored, carrying the unmistakable weight of something prepared with intention. At the top of the page, written in elegant handwriting, were the words, "To Vanessa Brooks." For a moment, the room disappeared. The attorneys remained silent as she began reading. If you are reading this letter, then I am no longer here to explain these decisions myself. That is unfortunate, because some things deserve to be said face to face. Vanessa continued slowly. Arthur's words felt personal, direct, almost conversational. You may believe we only met once. In a technical sense, that is true. Yet I learned more about your character during that single afternoon than I learned about many people after decades of knowing them. Heiress moved down the page. Most individuals spend their lives trying to be noticed. You spent yours trying to be useful. Most people become generous when generosity is convenient. You remained generous when nobody was watching. Vanessa swallowed quietly. The room remained perfectly still. Arthur described the fundraiser from years earlier in remarkable detail. He remembered how she had spent time speaking with elderly guests while influential donors competed for attention elsewhere. He remembered that she stayed late helping volunteers clean up after the event ended. He remembered how she treated every person with the same level of respect regardless of status. Then came the sentence that made her pause. You reminded me of the values upon which I built my life before success complicated everything. Vanessa lowered the letter briefly. Outside the windows, sunlight reflected across the river. Somewhere below, the city continued moving at full speed. Jet inside. That room, time seemed suspended. Charles Bennet waited patiently as she resumed reading. Arthur explained that over the years he had quietly reviewed reports concerning charitable programs, business initiatives, and community projects connected to her work. Again and again, he found the same pattern. Consistency. Integrity. Humility. Not perfection. Something he valued far more. Character. The final pages revealed something else. Arthur had spent the last several years struggling with a difficult question. Who should carry his legacy forward? His relatives had wealth. His executives had experience. His advisors had influence. Yet according to his letter, none possessed the qualities he believed mattered most. Vanessa reached the final paragraph. Her pulse quickened slightly. In the coming days, many people will speculate about my decisions. Some will disagree with them. Others will challenge them. That is expected. What matters is that I made them with complete certainty. Beneath those words was a final instruction. A public announcement regarding Arthur Kensington's estate would take place the following week. Attendance was mandatory. Details would remain confidential until then. Vanessa slowly folded the letter. Questions filled her mind. More than before. Not fewer. Charles finally spoke. The announcement will attract considerable public attention. Vanessa looked up. Why? The attorney exchanged a brief glance with his colleagues. Then he answered carefully. Because the entire country is currently trying to determine who inherited Arthur Kensington's empire. Across Manhattan, financial news channels were already discussing the mystery daily. Market analysts debated possibilities. Journalists chased rumors. Business leaders speculated constantly. Yet none of them knew what Vanessa now knew. Somewhere behind all the headlines, Arthur Kensington had already made his choice. And in just a few days, the world was going to learn it. The days leading up to the announcement moved strangely. For everyone else, it was another week of headlines, meetings, and speculation. For Vanessa, it felt like standing at the edge of a door that had already begun to open. News coverage surrounding Arthur Kensington's estate intensified with each passing day. Financial commentators debated potential successors. Business journals published endless predictions. Industry experts confidently named executives, relatives, and board members they believed would inherit control. Not once did anyone mention Vanessa Brooks. She preferred it that way. On Tuesday morning, she sat alone in a small neighborhood coffee shop reviewing notes from the legal meeting. Arthur's letter remained folded carefully inside her bag. She had read it so many times that entire sections now lived in her memory. Yet one question continued following her. Why had he trusted her with something so important? Across town, Ryan Walker watched the same news coverage from his office. A television mounted on the conference room wall displayed another segment discussing the Kensington Empire. One analyst estimated the estate's value at several $billion. Another speculated about major changes within the business world once the heir was revealed. Ryan listened with casual interest while preparing for an investor luncheon. The topic fascinated everyone in his industry. No one wanted to miss the biggest business story of the year. Whoever inherits that empire is going to become one of the most influential people in America overnight, one executive remarked. Ryan nodded. That kind of opportunity changes everything. The irony passed unnoticed. Meanwhile, Vanessa's laugh remained surprisingly quiet. She continued volunteering. Continued meeting friends. Continued walking through the city without attracting attention. Yet subtle changes were beginning to appear. Kensington legal associates contacted her regularly. Security arrangements were quietly discussed. Travel schedules were coordinated. Confidential documents required signatures. Each conversation reminded her that something enormous was approaching. On Thursday evening, another envelope arrived from the law firm. Inside was a formal invitation to the public announcement ceremony. The event would take place at the Kensington Foundation Hall, one of the most prestigious venues in Manhattan. Business leaders, media outlets, investors, and public officials had all been invited. Vanessa studied the invitation beneath the soft light of her apartment. The date. The time. The location. Everything suddenly felt real. Her phone rang moments later. It was Monica. After hearing about the ceremony, her friend immediately sensed the significance. You sound calm, Monica said. Vanessa glanced toward the window. City lights stretched across the skyline beyond the glass. I do not know if I am calm, she admitted. I think I am still trying to understand why any of this is happening. Monica laughed softly. Maybe because somebody saw something valuable long before anyone else did. The words lingered after the call ended. Later that night, Vanessa opened Arthur's letter once more. Heiress settled on a single sentence she had nearly overlooked before. Character becomes visible when recognition disappears. She read the line twice. Then she carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. The following morning, while cameras and journalists began gathering outside Kensington Foundation Hall, Vanessa stood quietly in front of her bedroom mirror. Not nervous. Not excited. Just thoughtful. Because in a matter of hours, an entire room filled with powerful people would learn a truth that Arthur Kensington had already known for years. And somewhere among that crowd, completely unaware of what was coming, Ryan Walker would be watching too. The crowd began arriving more than an hour before the ceremony. Black vehicles lined the entrance to Kensington Foundation Hall. Cameras flashed continuously as executives, investors, public officials, and media personalities stepped onto the red carpet. Reporters discussed the same question over and over. Who would inherit Arthur Kensington's empire? Inside the grand hall, hundreds of guests filled rows of polished seats beneath towering crystal chandeliers. Conversations moved through the room like waves. Every table held printed programs. Every screen displayed Arthur Kensington's name. The atmosphere felt less like a memorial and more like history waiting to happen. Rajan Walker entered through the main doors with Ashley Monroe beside him. Several people greeted him immediately. Handshakes. Smiles. Business conversations. He carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to being noticed. Although he had no connection to the Kensington family, events like this attracted influential figures from every corner of the business world. Rajan glanced around the room as they found their seats near the front. "This is going to dominate the news cycle for months," Ashley whispered. Rajan nodded. "Whoever gets announced today becomes the story." A few rows farther back, Vanessa entered quietly. No cameras followed her. No reporters approached her. She wore a simple navy dress and carried herself with calm composure. Most people never looked twice. Tosehu did assume she was another guest attending the ceremony. She preferred it that way. Charles Bennett greeted her near a private entrance and escorted her to a reserved seat. "Everything is ready," he said softly. Vanessa simply nodded. Her heartbeat remained steady. The anxiety she expected never arrived. Instead, she felt something closer to clarity. The room slowly settled as the ceremony began. A large screen illuminated the stage with photographs from Arthur Kensington's life. His accomplishments. His businesses. His charitable work. The audience listened respectfully as speakers reflected on his legacy. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Charles Bennett stepped onto the stage. Instantly, the hall grew silent. Hundreds of eyes followed him. Cámaras reposicionadas. Journalists leaned forward. Even Ryan straightened slightly in his chair. Charles spoke calmly, thanking guests for attending. He summarized Arthur's extraordinary career and described the careful process that had guided the estate's transition. Then his voice became more deliberate. During the final years of his life, Arthur Kensington dedicated significant time to determining who should carry forward the responsibility attached to his legacy. A murmur moved through the audience. Charles continued. After extensive consideration, he reached his decision with complete certainty. Every conversation disappeared. The room felt suspended in anticipation. Rajan folded his hands together and focused on the stage. Around him, executives exchanged curious glances. Everyone expected a familiar name. A relative. A corporate successor. A prominent figure from within the Kensington organization. Charles opened a folder. The sound of turning paper echoed through the microphone. Then he spoke the words that changed everything. The sole beneficiary and successor designated by Arthur Kensington is Vanessa Brooks. For 1 second, nobody reacted. It was as though the entire room needed time to process what it had heard. Then heads turned. Confused whispers erupted across the hall. Journalists checked notes frantically. Cameras pivoted toward the audience. Rajan's expression froze. Ashley stared toward the stage. Charles calmly extended his hand toward Vanessa's row. Slowly, Vanessa rose to her feet. And in that single moment, an entire room filled with powerful people realized they had never seen the name coming. For several seconds after Vanessa stood, the hall remained frozen in disbelief. The whispers grew louder. Journalists exchanged stunned looks. Reporters hurriedly searched their notes, trying to understand how a name almost nobody expected had suddenly become the center of the most important inheritance announcement in the country. Yet Vanessa did not rush. She simply stood there, composed and steady, while hundreds of eyes followed her. On the stage, Charles Bennett waited patiently before continuing. Arthur Kensington left additional instructions to explain his decision. The room gradually quieted again. Charles opened another document and began reading directly from Arthur's final statement. The value of a legacy is not determined by who can control it. It is determined by who can honor it. Silence return. I spent years observing individuals with wealth, influence, education, and power. Yet the person who consistently demonstrated character without seeking recognition was Vanessa Brooks. Across the room, Ryan felt the words land with unexpected weight. He has never left Vanessa. The same woman he had ignored only days earlier now stood at the center of a moment that would be discussed across boardrooms, news networks, and financial markets for years. Charles continued reading. Success reveals many things. Most importantly, it reveals who a person was before success arrived. Vanessa Brooks never changed because recognition was never her purpose. Several guests lowered their eyes thoughtfully. Others simply watched Vanessa with growing respect. Then came the final confirmation. Arthur Kensington had transferred controlling ownership of his foundation, investments, and business holdings to Vanessa Brooks. The room erupted into a wave of reactions. Some shocked. Some impressed. Some completely speechless. Cameras flashed continuously. Reporters rushed toward exits to file breaking stories. Yet amid the chaos, Vanessa remained calm. When Charles invited her onto the stage, she walked forward without hesitation. There was no triumphant speech. No dramatic celebration. She simply accepted the responsibility Arthur had entrusted to her. That quiet dignity somehow spoke louder than any words could have. After the ceremony ended, guests crowded the hall discussing the announcement. Ryan finally moved through the crowd toward Vanessa. For the first time in a very long time, uncertainty appeared on his face. "Vanessa," he said softly. She turned. "I had no idea." Vanessa studied him for a moment. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Simply with clarity. The same clarity she had been finding throughout this entire journey. Ryan searched for something more to say, but the words never seemed to arrive. So many opportunities disappear long before people realize they are gone. Vanessa offered a polite smile. Then she turned toward the exit. Outside, the late afternoon sunlight reflected across the glass towers of Manhattan. The city looked exactly the same as it had a week earlier. Yet everything had changed. Not because she inherited an empire. Not because she became wealthy. But because the value Arthur Kensington recognized in her had existed long before any of this happened. As her car pulled away from the foundation hall, the skyline stretched across the horizon ahead. Behind her remained the noise, the regret, and the people who finally understood her worth. Ahead waited something far more important. Her future. And for the first time in years, it belonged entirely to her.